topic at all, Mr.?
No, thank you.
Okay, so per the start of this, I requested that we go to the unified regional approach as our next item of business, and then we'll come back to our normal work. So we are gonna invite Brian Douglas Scott and I want to say Liza.
Liza.
Dang it, Liza, Brunel.
Let me know.
There you go. From Uncommon Bridges to kind of give us an update on where they are, and Ms. Kelly will introduce this.
Thank you, Madam Chair Hitchin. For the record, Andrea Kelly, council staff. By way of background, in October 2024, Pierce County entered into a contract with Uncommon Bridges following a competitive process for consultation services to advance the unified regional approach to homelessness, also known as the URA. This contract is supported by $950,000 in ARPA dollars through 2026 to advance the unified regional approach for coordinating homelessness response throughout Pierce County. Contract language indicates that this will be achieved by collecting input and building consensus among local governments and community partners within the county to design and implement the URA. Pursuant to the contract, as part of the scoping phase, Uncommon Bridges is responsible for identifying project participants, convening the leadership group and the project coordination team, developing and submitting the community compensation guidelines to council for review, and the creation and delivery of the project charter. So with that, today from Uncommon Bridges, we have Project Director Brian Scott, Project Manager Liza Burrell, to provide an update on the work that has been accomplished thus far.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Welcome to the council.
Good morning, council members, Brian Scott and Liza Burrell with Uncommon Bridges to give you a quick introduction to and overview of progress on the unified regional approach to homelessness in Pierce County. Next slide, please. I'd like to quickly give you an introduction to our team, which I think covers the framework of the project, talk about the project purpose, its timeline and structure, and then Liza is going to share some of the early input we've had during the scoping phase of the project, and then we'll close with a description of the project planning launch, which is scheduled for the end of next week. Next slide. By way of introduction, next slide. Whoops, sorry, I said it too many times. Our partner in charge for this project is Noelle Frame. Several of you may know Noelle. She's busy in Olympia as a state senator the other half of her life, but she's one of my partners at Uncommon Bridges. I'm the project director. I founded Uncommon Bridges 16 years ago and have worked primarily in facilitation and consensus building my full career. Liza has a long background in nonprofits on homeless issues, and she's our project manager. We're joined by Sarah Solon, who's a subject matter expert with HRNA. She's worked on homeless coordination and unified approaches in many cities across the country. Jackie St. Louis is a licensed mental health counselor and specialist in homeless services with a variety of different organizations. He's also a Pierce County resident, lives in Puyallup. My partners, Ishmael Nunez and Andres Mantilla, are both senior advisors, Ishmael focusing on community engagement and Andres on policy and facilitation. And our assistant project manager is Marisol Biaz. Slide. We think this project has three primary elements: government consensus building, community and stakeholder engagement, and technical research and operations. Slide. And we have arranged this team with people who have expertise in each of those areas to guide the project forward. Slide. Uncommon Bridges, as I mentioned, I founded 16 years ago as BDS Planning. We envision vibrant, just, and thriving communities and specialize in consensus leadership, inclusive process, impactful organizations, and meaningful places. We think this project has most of those elements very strongly. Slide. For this effort, we are partnered with HRNA, that is a national consulting firm focusing on public policy and planning, and Define Concepts, which is Jackie St. Louis's firm based in Puyallup. Next slide. A couple of examples of projects that we've done that relate to this one. The project that brought me to the Puget Sound was the facilitation of the decision about what to do about the Alaskan Way Viaduct on the Seattle waterfront when it was damaged by the Nisqually earthquake. It was my report that said a deep bore tunnel could be supported by a consensus of leadership that led to that solution that's now in place. Next slide. I also facilitated a regional solution to emergency communications in King County with the King County E911 strategic plan. Next slide. And we've done a number of projects really closely related in subject matter and location. We collaborated with Jackie St. Louis on facilitation and community engagement for the Tacoma Housing Authority on their Arlington Drive Youth Campus. And Jackie, as I mentioned, has a deep background he's a licensed mental health counselor and has a deep background in direct outreach to people experiencing homelessness, first for the Downtown Seattle Association, then for the cities of Seattle and Vancouver, Washington. And then he currently specializes in private practice in mental health counseling based in Puyallup. Next slide. HRNA and Sarah Solon have projects in building unified regional approaches in a number of different places, including illustrated here, the New York Housing Conference and A Home for All for the United Way in Charlotte and Mecklenburg County in North Carolina. Slide. So this project, that's who we are. The project, next slide, and next slide. The purpose of this project is to agree on and launch more collaborative homeless response services across Pierce County. And as we first, saw the request for proposal and tried to conceive the project and then told people we won this project, everybody always says, so how are you going to solve homelessness? And we're not promising that we're going to do that. This is about a unified regional approach. It's trying to get all the different players in Pierce County working together on whatever the solution is for you. It's not a study. You have a pretty good plan. You have a number of studies that have been done. This is about making a deal across the different jurisdictions that are in play in Pierce County and getting started on a unified regional approach. Next slide. Our role in the project is outreach and engagement to elected officials, government staff, service providers, and people with lived experience in Pierce County with homelessness. Research on best practices and regional unified approaches across the country. That's a lot of Sarah's role. Facilitation and consensus, that is coming to agreement across the different jurisdictions in the county, and then designing and implementing support, so launching the approach. Next slide. The timeline and structure to get us there, next slide, is 3 parts. First, scoping, which began with a contract in October, and we're just coming up toward the end of that phase. Next slide. Just coming to the end of scoping. The next phase, launching in the next couple of weeks, is the planning phase and running into the following spring. So it's about a year, is design for exactly what is this approach. And then before we're finished, it's very clear that we need to get going. We need to not just give you a report, but actually have it up and running. So most of 2026 we'll be working on implementation and moving that forward. Next slide. To get us there, we have outlined a structure, and we'll be launching that at a regional meeting next week with an elected leadership group, because it feels to us like the planning that's been done here so far, the biggest missing element has been sort of agreement across elected leaders with the county and the different jurisdictions that are here. So we're putting together an elected leadership group of 12 to 15 people from the different jurisdictions around Pierce County. That's coming together pretty well. We'll be able to announce the group next week, but we think we're getting good response to people that are being asked to be on the group. And then we're putting together a staff expertise group to support those elected officials, because the staff of your various jurisdictions are the ones involved every day in this work. And then we think there will be 3 task forces. This will be formed up with that leadership group as it comes together. One focus on governance is how are you going to make decisions over time in this unified regional approach? One on finance, how are you going to pay for all of this and who's paying for what and how is it financed? And then one on operations, exactly how does it work? Exactly what that structure looks like, We don't know. That's the work of these task forces in the months ahead. So that's the structure of the project. As I mentioned, we'll be, next slide, we'll be putting together, sort of rolling this out at a regional meeting next week. And Liza's going to give you a rundown on some of the feedback we've been hearing during this scoping phase.
Thank you. Next slide, please. I also want to take a moment and thank everyone here who has talked to someone on the Uncommon Bridges team. If you have, thank you very much. I know we've been doing a lot of outreach, so thank you. So what we are, so our initial engagement, we're really looking at what is the purpose, the structure, and the launch of this meeting with the support from jurisdictions throughout Pierce County. As Brian said, it's super important that this is seen as an initiative beyond the council, beyond any single jurisdiction. So we're really doing a lot of engagement with elected leaders from across the jurisdictions in Pierce County, as well as government staff. We've reached out, so you can see we've reached out to 33 elected officials, interviewed 15. I think I pulled this together mid last week, so I think it's even more than that. It's every day we sort of schedule a new one. We've reached out to 21 government staff, interviewed 16. I have a 17th scheduled for tomorrow, so we'll just keep on doing that, and we'll continue to do this up until the meeting and then throughout the process, because we want to make sure we have plenty of opportunities to understand what's going on and to bring that understanding to the group that is really making the decisions. We've also been engaging with homeless service providers through this, and we will continue to do so. So that's some of our initial engagement. Next slide, please. So early themes. I don't know if this will be, wow, I had no idea this is what people thought, or you're like, this all makes sense. But so the greatest news is that there's real momentum around collaboration. Across the board, across all the jurisdictions, people are seeing the need. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean people know exactly what to do. So trust must be built early and probably needs to be touch point ongoing, so that the trust between jurisdictions, the trust within jurisdictions, that all of it sort of is just one of those ongoing things whenever you do these large processes. Political will can be inconsistent. So both that's within a jurisdiction as well as across jurisdictions, right? So some folks are very much like, we want to do it all, and we want to do it really, like we want to be responsive and be able to serve folks right here, right now. And other folks are like, we're too small. We just can't do that. And how does that look? And sort of all of the various ways that shows up as political will or the will to do this kind of work. Another big thing we're hearing is the county itself must be a player in this, including the unincorporated regions, which Pierce County has a lot of land. Smaller towns have limited service and influence on solutions, but are willing to engage. We've also heard, and we need smaller jurisdictions to have some skin in the game. So that's some of these complex conversations that we're going to be having with this elected leadership team, is what does it mean to have skin in the game? It doesn't always mean funding. It could mean something different, but what are those opportunities? The unequal burden, this goes along with the smaller towns. So City of Tacoma runs most of the shelters. Within the City of Tacoma, there's a lot of services, but that of course is not meeting, that's not going out throughout the county. So it's both and the City of Tacoma may be feeling a little overburdened, but also the rest of the county feeling like, how do we get folks into those services and what does that look like? So some of that, just the need for more housing and more shelter options. Data-informed solutions. Data is a very big theme that we're hearing, just the lack of, can we trust it? Is it real? How do we get our hands on it? How do we make decisions using it? All of that. And I just want to say that is par for the course when working in homeless response. The data and the ability to have real-time data is always frustrating, frankly. And then multi-year funding, which is a less cumbersome process. And we're hearing that from service providers, but we're also hearing that from jurisdictions who are also getting funded by the county. Next slide, please. So there's going to be tensions in any of these. That's why we were hired. If this was easy, y'all would have figured it out. So some of the tensions are reflective of the list I just went through, But again, it's the smaller versus larger approaches, both their capacity, maybe their political will, maybe what's going on in their constituency. But just all of that stuff that makes a certain jurisdiction do what they do. Smaller jurisdictions having limited resources. The regional approach that may undermine some local strategies and priorities. So it's both and, right? We want something more collaborative and that might undermine what we're doing. The centralized leadership from Pierce County and also avoid bureaucracy. And also some jurisdictions don't want to be assigned roles. So all of those things don't always, it's kind of a little hard. So, but part of our job, right, is to tease out these tensions and to really like support y'all to, not just y'all, but the jurisdictions to figure out, okay, what can we agree on? Which is exactly what Brian was like, what deal can we make here? And then there's an uneven response. This is not new to this is right. So what some jurisdictions do versus what other jurisdictions do. And really, how do we create like, what are these groups that come together across Pierce County? What are we willing to align on and then coordinate and collaborate about? Next slide, please. All right, now I'm going to hand back to Brian, who's going to talk about our big meeting on March 7th.
So one nice thing about the outreach that we've done is one thing we're not hearing is don't do this. Pretty much people are showing up to talk. They want to talk. They have thoughts. It doesn't make the problem simple, but everybody's like, yeah, we need to figure this out. Next slide, please. So next week, March 7th, we're going to do our first actual formal meeting on this. And one way to spin it would be it's a follow-up to the meeting that Councilmember Hitchin convened last April to start beginning the topic. We invited everybody that was at that meeting and other folks that we've engaged through the process. Elected officials and government staff is the target for this to get everybody on the same page about where we're starting. We've invited about 80 people. As of today, we have about 30 people registered. So we're feeling pretty good about the turnout. At that meeting, we've got several members of this council. We've got Tacoma, Puyallup, Fircrest, Edgewood, Gig Harbor, and University Place. We're making some phone calls to some of the other jurisdictions there to try and make sure we have everybody in the room for that meeting next week to sort of announce the project structure and leadership. Next slide. And the agenda for that meeting will be a welcome from Councilmember Hitchin and Executive Mello. We want to talk about the purpose and local history on a regional approach and background. We want to talk about the need for this approach in Pierce County, and we're getting some support from Garrett Nyland, who's really knowledgeable about local data, putting together some of the facts and figures about how things are working now. And then we want to spend the bulk of the meeting talking about the project structure and decision-making and try and get agreement on how we're going to make decisions and basically the ground rules of how this project is going to go over the next almost 2 years. And then work on a vision and some guiding principles on how the project and how ultimately, whatever the unified regional approach is, the guiding principles that'll help us put that together, and then do some brainstorming on problems to solve together, outlining the work of what that's going to be. And then we'll hope to have some local officials do a close. Next slide. So there's a quick overview of who we are and the project that we have outlined, the progress that we've made. Be happy to respond to any of your questions. Again, to respond to Liza, I know a number of you have talked to Noel or Andres, and we appreciate that.
Thank you very much for the overview and the work so far. I'll look to my colleague to see if people have questions for you this morning. Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the presentation. I just want to make sure that when you're communicating to suburban and rural jurisdictions also. All the projects that you talked about were urban core generated. Thinking in the urban area is a lot different than the suburban and rural areas, especially when Pierce County has so much geographic ground in unincorporated Pierce County. We're not like King County. So I am still leery about this approach because of I guess, watching some of the failures that have taken place both in Oregon and Washington. So hopefully you are learning from those challenges that Multnomah County had and King County obviously had. So that's my concern. The other thing is that Pierce County is 80, if not 85% a transit desert. We have no transportation. So a lot of the homelessness that I see out there is along the transit corridors because of the mobility. Bonnie Lake, Buckley, the smaller towns just don't see it. But yet they need to be included in the conversation. Also, philanthropy needs to be involved. One of the challenges we have in this county is getting private dollars invested in some of these programs. We've only had one success, and that's the Good Neighbor Village, where they have partnered with the Tacoma Rescue Mission. All other efforts, they really haven't engaged in our homeless challenges. So I really want to make sure that you guys are engaging on that. And then as far as local control goes, yeah, it's a trust issue. The state has not done any jurisdictions any favor over the last 4 years on taking local control away from councils. And so they are going to be leery of it. And then, it gets down to funding. You guys need to know what our budget is and what it's going to look like. And I don't know what federal funding is going to be available in the future. So there has to be a reality check on what we can or cannot do. And so we don't lay the expectations out and fall flat. So those are my concerns right off the bat. And I
Great.
appreciate the work that you're doing.
Great points. Thank you for your input. One of the things I realized was on an earlier version of those lists was this looks different in different places in the county. And it sure does. And we've been hearing a lot about that. We also heard everything about finance has been, well, this is what it is now, but there's a whole bunch of ARPA dollars in that. And as soon as that goes away, it's going to be real different. So your points are dead on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the questions. We'll go to Councilmember Ayala.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you so much for all the work that you have done on this thus far, and knowing that it's going to be another 2 years plus on it. I'm curious if you could share a little bit on the research on best practices that has been done and how that research is being presented to the public, and essentially what the plan is to merge these two entities together.
When you say these two entities, I just want to make sure I'm tracking. What are the two entities?
The members
Welcome to
participating.
Do It Right, Serve It Safe, a training program on
The participants.
Oh, so the folks experiencing homelessness?
Oh, no. The folks that are at the table that will be part of the regional approach.
Oh, how are they learning about the best practices? How are we merging? Yes, so HRNA, who is one of our subs, is really charged with finding examples throughout the country of unified regional approaches. It sort of goes a little bit to what Councilmember Morell, you were saying. It's not, so what we're really looking at is finding approaches around problems. So not an approach that designates a new government entity, but maybe approaches that have done contracting a different way, or have done inclement weather a different way, or have done shelter access a different way. So what we're looking for, because what we've heard loud and clear is that we are not focused on creating a new entity. That's all to be determined through this process. So what we want to bring are actual examples of where other regions across the country have unified around some issue or problem within their homeless response. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring those examples to all of those meetings. So we're going to bring them to the elected leadership group to help them scope out the problems they are willing to collaborate and coordinate around, because that might help them if they see other places. But it's also equally important that those task forces, who are really those who are impacted either through their own lived experience or by working with folks with lived experience or philanthropy or other government staff, but they also see these, like what's possible, so that they could then develop recommendations that are based on what's possible, and then they'll bring in the Pierce County specificity. I don't know if that answers your question, but we will be bringing that content to these levels of like, here's where, here's what Houston did, here's what Austin did, here's what, Mecklenburg County did, as examples of how different jurisdictions have regionalized different pieces of their homelessness response. That answer you?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the question. We'll go to Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I can't imagine trying to put this together. There's so much here, but many of my concerns have already been articulated. But I kind of want to focus in on the cost of housing. And obviously, we don't have enough of it yet. Most of the legislation that is happening is increasing the cost of living or increasing the cost of building a house, and yet here we need to build homes. And the taxpayers are kind of flustered in that they can barely cover their own expenses now. And now there's more on other people's housing, more on other people's food, more on other people's healthcare, et cetera. And I'm trying to find a case across the country where building more places has made it better. And Colorado comes to mind, where I don't know how many millions or billions they spent on housing, and yet it didn't work. And so I'm going to be looking for what will be different in this approach that hasn't been done that will make it successful. And my other concern is this moving out into the unincorporated areas where we do not have the infrastructure to work with this. And the mention of transit was very pertinent because it is kind of moving out towards my area. And then there's a big transit center, and I'm concerned with, we don't have the infrastructure to generate revenue out here for these projects. When I look at the transit center in Tacoma, and yet Tacoma has the port, they have all these industries and things that are generating revenue, places to put people. And out where I am, that's just not there. It's not that people aren't there that need the services, but I don't know how this is going to look in the long run. And the dollars, again, is my concern, as has been mentioned before. I already have in my district the Village, which is building out. And that can only accommodate, I believe, less than 200 or less than 300. And anyway, I just kind of want to keep tabs on things going.
Those are good questions, and we'll make sure that Sarah knows about the looking for national examples on supply. And what we're trying to do here is create a unified regional approach, which is we're trying to get everybody in Pierce County rowing in the same direction, which will require that we understand the differences between different parts of the county. But if I just want to reiterate, we can't solve the whole homeless problem for this in this sort of finite scope of work, but we can try to get everybody on the same page about how you're addressing it together.
And I appreciate that. it seems I don't want it to grow.
Right,
Yeah.
the problem
Yeah.
to grow.
And
Good point.
so, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for the questions and comments. Any other questions for our presenters this morning? Well, I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much. I think I'm looking forward to the meeting on the 7th and seeing what people have to say and the work from our jurisdictions. There was definitely, it's good to hear that you're hearing there's continued interest. I know there was hesitancy initially, and I think really continuing to go, how do we do this together? The county is one of the players, but we're not the only, and Tacoma's not the only. It's all of us together. And I'm going to say it again, this is not a dump all the money into the pot and distribute like King County's model. We saw that not go so well. So I don't think anyone in this group is going to be, let's copy King County's model. So just to clarify, that came up loud and clear at that first initial meeting as a hesitancy, and in every communication that I've had with Uncommon Bridges, there isn't anyone that I've heard that really wants to go that route. So if that's something that causes people hesitance, but we do need to have a response. And if we have a response as a county, I think it serves especially our smaller jurisdictions that don't have shelter access, who don't have human services providers on their staff. Like, we have those things. Some of our jurisdictions do, but many don't. So how do we support their residents? How do we work together to support their residents when they are on the cusp of and enter homelessness? And that really is the goal, to have a response in Pierce County that meets our really diverse geography and countywide needs. So thank you for helping us try and find that path. It's going to be a challenge, but we're excited for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.